that looks at what happened in the township economy as soon as we started giving the COVID grant, the 50.
Okay.
It meant that mina, who gets my grant here in Dobson, ngizohamba ngiyothenga lapho itamatisi kamama masibani ngiyothenga isinkwa kwaSibandlani.
Okay.
It meant that cash started circulating more in the local economy.
Yeah.
Right?
Hi and welcome back to the show. And this today we'll be talking economics. It's 2024. It's the year of elections, and I thought this topic would be nice to be discussing because this one needs like money, employment, things that go with people's well-being. Today on the show, Renale, a guest from Rivonia Circle, and we'll be discussing these matters: equality, economics, and what works best. I think that's the core thing that everyone would want to know. Finally, Londiwe Mntambo. Did I pronounce it right?
Okay.
I'm horrible when it comes to pronouncing names. And Londiwe says, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Okay, I'm good, thanks. I've seen you present a couple of times. Rivonia Circle, I don't know what you call these things, events, and we'll be discussing but what do you actually do? Or maybe, yeah, what do you do?
What do I do, or what does Rivonia Circle do?
Both.
Okay. So, as you introduced, my name is Londiwe Mntambo. I am the program manager at the Rivonia Circle. And essentially, my job is to make sure that we've got programs and projects running across the country in different iterations of those programs.
Okay.
I'll mention a few.
Yeah.
So we've got what we call the Democracy Builder, which is one of our flagship programs. It's one of my babies.
Right.
Super excited. We're coming up on the 100th Democracy Builder next week.
Okay.
Super excited for that. And that program really just seeks to mobilize and capacitate communities and community organizers in order to engage democracy and engage governance and engage in their communities.
All right.
And self-organize and
Yeah.
all of those things and co-govern in their communities. The output of that program is usually a project-based kind of thing,
Okay.
where people in the room decide on the issue that they want to solve for, and then they create projects to try and solve for that.
Yeah.
And we've done projects, I think we've got about 9 agriculture projects, which include farms, what is this thing called, chicken coops, different iterations. I think there's a pig farm in Cape Town, in Philippines, or in Khayelitsha, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So the idea is for people to own their democracy and own the engagements, and that can take different forms, right?
Yes.
So someone will ask you, what does the creation of a chicken coop have to do with democracy? But of course it does, because it has to do with the well-being of those people who are creating that business. It also has to do with the well-being of the community who are now engaging in this business, right? And democracy is about well-being.
Yeah.
So that's just one of the programs that we do. We do political theatre, where we try to get artists to express themselves when it comes to politics, and when it comes to their engagement with democracy.
Okay.
Often artists are left behind in these kinds of conversations.
Okay.
So we try to get them involved. We do multiple other things. Just coming up now is what we call voter conversations. We were really going to try, at least for us as the Rivonia Circle, it's important that someone is on the side of the voter, and that the voter is the one that wins this particular election. So yeah, that's what we're doing, and I just basically make that happen.
I hear you. Well, for those of you who haven't probably want to know about Rivonia Circle, we have a video again where Tessa Dooms, you'll see the link on the top, that you can watch and you can hear about Rivonia Circle and what it does. It's an awesome program. I actually like what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
But today's topic then, economics.
Yeah.
I mean, and economic structures or economic models, however one puts it. My question, I think, maybe before we can go far, in your own understanding or in your own explanation, how can we define economics as?
Okay, so I mean, I think definitions sometimes are problematic and
Yeah.
and limit us in particular conversations. I think for me, when we think about economics, often mina nawe sizocabanga imali,
Yes.
sizocabanga jobs,
Yes.
sizocabanga business,
Yes.
right? We'll think about those as the economic drivers,
Yeah.
the things that make the economy function.
Yeah.
And I think that that's fair as an understanding, and that's fair as an initial thought. Because oftentimes what happens when we define it in technical terms, ubuthi, the means of production,
Yeah.
they did this
Yes.
and this, often we exclude certain people from the conversation,
Yeah.
because those kinds of formal definitions mean that mina nawe sihlelela elokishini, we don't think of ourselves as part of the economy.
Exactly.
So for me, I prefer the lens of political economy, which basically allows us to talk about the relationship between people,
Yes.
individuals,
Yeah.
the government, as well as trade and the private sector. So
Okay.
political economy allows us to thread the relationship,
Yeah.
rather than to say this is
Focus on
supply
certain-
and demand.
Yes.
Yabo.
Yeah.
Angiyenzanga ke mina economics.
Okay.
Angiyenzanga, but my understanding of the impact of our economy is something that, of course, from personal experience, but through our work as well in the
Yeah.
Rivonia Circle.
Mm.
So I think it's, for me, of course, it's about, they are systems, right? So, I mean, you hear about free market economy.
Yeah.
Free market economy is basically where there isn't any state regulation, right? So it's your more capitalist
Yes.
in nature, right? And the capitalism isn't regulated in any kind of way,
Yeah.
right? So it's really about, this is what we're supplying,
Mhm.
this is what people are demanding,
Yeah.
this is what it's costing,
Yeah.
and that's what's
And
happening,
that's it.
right? Whereas if you look at, I mean, South Africa is an example, maybe not the best example, but we'll talk about that
Yeah.
a little bit just now. Also remember, free market prioritizes private ownership.
Yes.
Ukuthi mina nginani.
Yes.
We can have the political conversation about
That's
what
yeah.
that means.
That's what
but
the capitalist system basically is more about, is to the individuals that can, and the way the capitalists like to argue with is, if I have the knowledge and the ability, then I have to be paid for it. And if I can, I will create for those who cannot. And knowledge plays a bigger part, ability plays a bigger part in it. The people who have the knowledge and the know-how get to be one of the biggest stakeholders for that matter. So they get to have more than those who do not have.
But you also hear in that kind of market, you also hear a lot about the means of production. And the Marxists will tell us the people must own the means of production.
Yeah.
And when ownership of the means of production rest or are held by a certain group of people, which is often a minority.
Yes.
So capitalism, or rather like the more extreme nature of capitalism, in your free market economy, requires or is sustained when less people own the means of production, or less people are what we call upper class or rich, right?
Yes.
And so that kind of economic structure thrives when mina nawe we can have a huge
piece of the
ownership.
pie.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what we have in South Africa, and what ideally should work, is this kind of, I think they call it like a mixed economy, right?
Okay.
So where you have business and you have private ownership, and let's not vilify business, let's not vilify private ownership, right? We encourage young people to be entrepreneurs all the time.
Yeah.
And so we must create a space for that to happen. Where we're not against business ever,
Yeah.
you know? And so they in a mixed economy, you have that element of private ownership and private business and private capital, but you also then have state regulation or government regulation, right? So where the government says, nizotaxwa into engaka, whether as individuals or as industry, nizotaxwa into engaka.
Maybe before we get there, because I want to get into that as a matter that we must probably explore. But maybe to hear from you, if we say maybe this is what we should do, it means that there's something wrong about the current system, or there's something not sufficient about the current system, that there is a need that we should supplement or change it altogether. And my question, I think, to you would be, what is it that you think is wrong with the current setup of the kind of capitalism that we have? I don't know if it's a truly extreme, or is it just a normal one, or so. I know political people will tell me stories about even our leaders in that aspect. But what is wrong with the current system, especially with, for me, strong emphasis to the guys who are extreme, in extreme part of poverty? What's wrong there in the current system?
So let's start with what's right, okay?
Okay.
Because I think that's a shorter list than the what's wrong. Leyo singabala, the whole thing.
Okay.
But so for me, what's right, and I mean this is obviously in the context of South Africa, and like I said, with this kind of mixed economy, what should be a social democracy, but really we haven't managed to fulfill that promise of the social democracy. And I'll talk a little bit later on when we talk about what should. I'll talk a little bit about the value of social democracy, and why it's important. So state regulation is very important when it comes to capital.
Yes.
And we've got that, right? So no one in this country can just do as they please when it comes to business, when it comes to capital. You have to uphold certain, there are rules and regulations. There are things that you must adhere to. There are taxes that must be paid, all of those things.
Yes.
Ideally, all of those things then lead us into a state or a government that is able to provide public goods. In this kind of mixed economy, the state is in charge of providing health, or at least, at the very least, public health. There are things that are public goods, education, the military belongs to the government. Izinto lezo that the state and the government is able to provide.
I think even some form of transportation it was.
Public transport, all of those things. Ideally, it should be happening in a way that allows everyone access to those things, right? The issue in South Africa, I think, is that it is not everybody who has so maybe everybody has access, right? But does everybody have good quality healthcare? Does everyone have good quality education? And I think our history and the kind of divide between the rich and the poor means that even in this mixed economy kind of system, we still struggle for the poorest of the poor to have access to good quality healthcare, right? Whereas Minanawe who have jobs and can have medical aid, as expensive as it is, which is also, I think, something that needs to be looked at, we can then have access to private healthcare. And there's a clear distinction in this country between private and public healthcare. So it's really a question of what do the most vulnerable people in our society have access to? And I think public versus private, we pale in comparison when it comes to quality. My mom, who's now, sadly late, used to work in a public hospital. She worked in a public hospital for most of my life, and she was an administrator there. She absolutely refused to be taken to that hospital when she was sick.
Whoa.
She absolutely refused to move when we were moving between private medical aid and then getting UGEMS.
Yeah.
She absolutely refused to move to UGEMS, and she's a government employee.
Yeah.
She's a government employee who works in the hospital, who refuses to use the hospital. Our own ministers refuse to use our hospitals. I think there's currently a case now in the Northwest.
Yes.
The person is being treated elsewhere.
Yeah.
And not in any public institution in the Northwest. And so when it comes to quality, unfortunately, the divide between public and private has remained with us throughout the democracy. The divide between who gets access to what it has just remained. And so for me, there's a need to have a conversation about how do we make this mixed economy work for the most vulnerable people in the society.
Exactly.
Right?
Firstly, before we go there, I think we can get into a subject of what would be the best model, or what can we probably do. But let's take a quick break and then we'll come back after this. Welcome back. We're still with us Londiwe, and we're still talking the economic structures. And I have a question. I've been thinking. I have a question. I'm looking at, with everything that we said before, I'm looking at the rate of unemployment in the country, and also looking at business development, if you can put it, small scale. People who are selling tomatoes at the street, and I'm thinking, why can't we fast track some things like that, or maybe what's the struggle with the economy that we cannot fast track the self-development and self-employment of people, nonetheless, if we cannot raise, probably, we cannot decrease the unemployment rate?
Oh, okay, that's a difficult one. So unemployment is obviously caused by multiple factors, right?
Okay.
In this country, so when the unemployment rate is reported, sadly, in this country, or maybe not sadly, but just in a messed up way, it does not include people who have stopped looking for jobs, right?
Okay.
It does not include people who, so it includes what is it called, active job seekers.
Okay.
There are millions of people in this country who stopped looking for jobs.
All right.
Because imisebenzi ayikho.
Yeah.
Right? And
completely discouraged.
Discouraged. Bahlala la nje lokushini siyabazi.
Yeah.
Or noma emakhaya, or wherever it is that they are based, right? But bahlale. It's why the corner of the street is busy.
Yeah.
It's why there'll be activities in the park and people are available, right? So that's the first thing about unemployment, is that the broader definition of unemployment includes people who stopped looking for jobs. It includes people who are what is it called? People who haven't worked in 10 years, for example. Okay. So the broader definition for me, I think, gives us a bit of a more dire picture of our situation.
Yeah.
And the situation is bad. Guys.
I realize it.
And so that's one of the major things, right? Youth unemployment in particular is skyrocketing because the understanding or at least the strategy was to get us to higher education. Let's go.
Yeah.
Get your qualifications, and then people sit with
They
qualifications
qualify,
and they can't get work in the things that they qualified for.
Mm.
Often that's a problem of a mismatch between
Yeah.
the skills that we have and the skills that the market requires.
Mhm.
Izinto eziningi esifundayo the market does not require. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
The market is changing, technology is changing. Our skills and the things that we learn need to then match the shifting
Yes.
context, right? But we sit here with the rate of unemployment as it is, whether you're talking about the broader or the more narrow
Yeah.
definition. In my experience and in the different conversations we've done with the Democracy Builder, unemployment is one of the issues that comes up in every single in every single conversation.
Mhm.
Whether you are in the suburb, you are in the township, where you are in the lali, doesn't matter where you are, the subject of unemployment will come up. And that's just because that is the reality
Yeah.
of our communities, right?
How do we deal with that?
You are asking me difficult questions.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe if I can add the spice, ne?
Yeah.
Based on what we are saying, I always wonder seeing young people at the corners and stuff like that, and you have these little flyers flying around WhatsApp and stuff like that. Internship there, job there, and I'm saying, are we having a job problem that young people are unemployed, or are our young people saying we don't want to work, we want something else? I don't know.
So I mean, it's definitely not the second one, right? So young people, it's the same with participation in
Yeah.
democracy. Young people want to participate, and in fact they are participating. Young people want to work. In every single conversation, like I've said with the unemployment, everybody is like, guys, sicela ukusebenza, right? Whether it's bazisebenza bona, so whether
Yes.
it's a self-employment or they are working for somebody,
Yeah.
some people just want a job.
Nothing else.
Some people just want a job that allows them to live a certain quality of life at a certain standard. Doesn't even they have to be anything
Yeah.
fancy. Just ngicela ukuphila and ngicela ukwazi ukuthi for the next few weeks there's food endlini,
Yeah.
right?
I
Some
get it.
people want to start businesses. We have to create a situation that allows a small scale business to flourish. It cannot be that Soweto kunesiphaza shop sase Pick and Pay noma sase Shoprite.
I feel you.
It can't be,
I feel
right?
you.
Because then how are you going to compete with Shoprite?
Yeah.
Right? So we have to think about the kinds of resource that you would have versus the kinds of resource that Shoprite would have. And this is why state regulation is important. The state and the government can say Shoprite nje cha isiphaza Soweto.
Election. Yeah.
Election, why?
I
Doesn't make sense.
I feel you. And but another on the other side, there was a report, but I think it's well known worldwide, and I don't think it's a South African thing. I think it's an African thing. Most of African countries, we are consumers.
Yes.
So the guy in auction, all that he wants is how do I get easy access to fresh bread,
Yes.
milk, and
Yes,
who
of course.
supplies that? I don't care. It can
Yes.
be Pick and Pay, I'm happy. As long as I know that I can get fresh bread from Pick and Pay or a liter of milk at an affordable price. So if Pick and Pay provides it, that's okay. And should we be having conversations of can we work harder into circulating an economy amongst us? You know?
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, there's what we call they refer to it as the township economy or the informal economy.
Yes.
Right. And those sometimes are used in
Interchangeably,
exchange.
yeah.
Sometimes they are separate.
Yeah.
Completely separate conversations. The the thing, so if you look at, and you know, maybe some people will vehemently disagree. If you look at there's a study actually that looks at what happened in the township economy as soon as we started giving the COVID grant, Lega 350.
Okay.
It meant that Mina, who gets my grant here in Dobsonville, because name is 350 ngizohamba ngesibiti job like no, right? Ngizohamba ngiyothenga lapho tamatisi kaMama Masibanibani, ngihambe ngiyothenga isinkwa kwaSibanibani, right? It meant that cash started circulating more in the local economy, right? Because clearly you can't with 350 rand, you can't go all the way to Pick and Pay in the CBD or wherever, right?
Okay.
Different parts of Joburg. And so we're going to use the cash here. For me, that's one of, and I'm trying to remember who did that study, but I can't for the life of me remember the name. For me, that, and I remember they did that study in order to advocate for
income grants.
Income grants. And the idea was that if we had a basic income grant of, oh my God, the numbers are escaping me, but it was just above 1,000.
1,000 rands. I think it was 1,250 or something
just
like
above
that.
1,000. You would then allow for the effects that we saw with the 350 grant, you would allow for those effects to replicate. Right? I don't know how you solve for unemployment at the rate at which we're at. Part of it is that looking at what do we have in the market. Kushodani. Ayashoda in ama skills in South Africa. And I don't think that that's the case. But also you solve it by creating environments where small-scale business can flourish. You create environments where capital is regulated and cannot bamboozle small business. And cannot bamboozle the employers in our local communities. Right? And so for me, it's important then for us to keep government institutions working and functioning, not only because we receive our public goods and our services, but also because you employ majority of the people in the country. It's important for us to have a functioning ESCOM. It's absolutely imperative. And it's imperative for that ESCOM to be owned by the state. Because if it's not owned by the state,
we lose it like I said.
Who between me and now, who will afford electricity?
True.
Right? We can discuss we can discuss where the limitations have been. And of course there are limitations, right? Because remember, our state entities pre-1994, our state entities were providing for the minority of the country. Our state entities immediately post 1994 and actually early 90s start to provide for the whole country.
Entire.
Right?
And by minority, by the way, you are not talking to something like 30 to 40% of the people.
11%.
The real minority, 10 to 11%. And all of a sudden, the 90% has to be equally taken care of, which is an outstretch on resources themselves. So I don't think people think about that when they're thinking about economic structures and talking politics for that matter. You know, that the game have completely changed and they changed badly because it's the same resources but stretched now to cater for the 90% that it didn't cater for.
It's important for us to shift back because historically this is the context that we're in. The context we're in is that majority of the people in this country are black and poor. Middle class black people, you know, I'm very happy for those who have who manage, you know.
Yeah.
Most middle class black people live in debt.
Yes, that's true.
It's what we call, when they talk about university funding, what they call the missing middle.
Okay.
Right? The missing middle are people who theoretically can afford fees at a university.
Yeah.
But because they take care of their own nuclear families, and then they take care of the families, and they are usually first generation graduates and you know, people who are doing really well in their families, and so the burden of care of their families rests on them, right? And that's a lot of middle class black people. That's a lot. That's a lot of people that live in that context, and those people live in debt.
Yeah.
Month to month, paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
We can make examples about ourselves.
Yeah.
We know these things, right? But what remains true in all of these things, ne? So one, what remains true is that you need a governance plan.
Yeah.
Ezoti. How do we solve for these things? Kancane.
Yes.
One, you need the governance plan to be a social democratic governance plan.
Yeah.
Because social democracy allows us to have this kind of mixed economy, have business and investment, but also still have welfare. You still have grants. You still have social protection. Ukuthi khona abantu who are the most vulnerable, who absolutely need a grant, right? So you need a governance plan that allows for both those things. What also remains true, the second thing that remains true, is that in all of these scenarios, the majority of this country who are black and poor are the ones who actually run the economy.
Okay, how so?
If you say we are consumers,
oh, yes.
ne? If indeed it is true that we are consumers, it means that every single one of us pays VAT.
Yeah.
Because if VAT, I avoid
it. Yeah, we can run away from it.
I avoid it.
We can't cheat on it.
Can't cheat. It's a standard. You know? I wonder, and then I'm pretty sure there is, if there's a study that says per day how much VAT we collect.
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting study. And because all of us consume in this economy, all of us interact in this economy, we should have the benefits of this economy. If that means that our tax is directed towards infrastructure, so roads, for example, there shouldn't be potholes.
No.
Right?
Especially with the number of cars that are on the road. There's a lot of tax in the petrol that says it's possible.
And the, you know, I think sometimes this is just tata kancane. You think, what does the pothole have to do with anything?
Yeah.
But good roads means that we can have services functioning. And so for me, I don't know, man. This conversation about economics, and that's why I like political economy. This conversation here, economics, has to take into account our context and our experience. That it is just facts that majority of the people in this country are poor. It's just facts. That's just a fact that we're dealing with. Right?
I don't know. Now, what next? Where do we go to from here?
Where do we go? I don't know.
Where do we go to from here? How do we... I mean, my passion is communities.
Yeah.
And my question would always be, how do we shift communities to the point of... You spoke about pick and pay. How do we shift and mobilize communities from a point of saying, guys, let's focus on our local spazas, or the local spazas guys come together and build their own supermarket, ShopRite-sized kind of a thing. But how do we practically do that things get to be functional? Or, in this case, how does even the state, through policies and governance, is able to make sure that the state-owned entities are are sustainable. One, we don't like lose one as we've lost SAA, because you can just think about the number of people who work for SAA.
Yeah.
Forget about everything else. But how do we keep things sustainable? At least, or even better, grow these state-owned entities and sustain or build a better economy for everyone.
Yeah, I think the how is a difficult part, is the difficult part. And, it's, but so firstly, I think we have to get in people who are experts in these things.
Okay.
You are telling me which is the people who are experts in the climate crisis, who are experts in the production of energy, they can't tell us what to do with ESCOM. Lie, guys.
Okay, I actually, there's two things that I would probably put. One is, I had a conversation with one of my brothers some years back in Cape Town, and he taught me a word, political will, and in me explaining, in him explaining to me what political will is, and he says, think about it. One of the famous planes in the world is a Concorde. And he says Concorde, when it came then, it was running in jet engines, and it was one of the fastest planes. And he says the same technology you have that pushes out, that is used as a jet engine, is the same technology that we know now as in cars as table. They have table. And he says, think about it, if they could make the jet engines then, they could have made tables for cars then. But because of there were people who were investing a lot in oil, and oil was the thing, Americans were building bigger cars, and there's no way that they could have allowed tables to be in cars, because of when you put a table, it's a know-how. You have a sufficient way of using energy, but that sufficient way is going to cost my pocket. So pack it. We can fund another project that you want to, but we are not going to use that. And I think it also applies in probably do we have real political will for pushing people out of debt? Or maybe when people are in poverty, somebody somewhere gains to say, let them stay there, because of if we can flip this thing and they can be well educated and they can own businesses and get advanced, something or somebody somewhere is going to start losing in his pocket. I don't know.
I think you need, like I had said earlier, a governance plan, one. But secondly, I think you need a political will. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah.
But also, we must ask ourselves, how do we get the people with the political will in power? Right?
Good question.
So if they are the people that are in power right now lack political will, then they must exit.
Yeah.
How do we then get people who have political will into power, right?
Or in the simplest term that is used now, people with a heart for the people.
Exactly.
Who have the interest of the people.
Right? We have an election coming up. How do we use our vote as citizens so that its utility is mine or ours? So that the utility of my vote is not for somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to start having those conversations in our communities.
Yeah.
So you were asking about how do we mobilize our communities. You start with a conversation.
Okay.
Sometimes when you host democracy builders, the first part of the program is a conversation about democracy, governance, and politics. Sometimes, as the facilitator, I let that conversation go on for much longer than is allocated on the program, because that community, it's their first time talking to each other about these things in a long time. So you have to get people talking.
Yeah.
Let's talk about democracy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the kind of governance that we have.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people will say flippantly, democracy nje ayisebenzi. Yini engasebenzi kwi-democracy?
Yeah.
Then when you start to explore, when you start to unpack, you find okay, actually it's the tangibles that democracy was supposed to give people that they don't have.
Yeah.
That's why they dismiss democracy.
Yeah.
It's not the system of democracy that doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's the cause and effect.
Yeah.
Effect.
Yeah.
Ayenzi.
Yeah.
And so what needs to change in the system in order for the effect to happen? And that's the conversation we need to
Yeah.
have. I think that's the first step for me. Let's talk.
Right.
The second step is you need to get people in the room, professionals, experts, whatever, to come and help you with your governance plan.
Okay.
It's okay. Amanzi, awekho. What is the issue?
This is, yeah.
I can't tell you how to make more electricity. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
There are people who can.
Mm.
There are people who can settle the debate between renewables and coal, which is a big debate in this country. There are people who can build us a system that allows the slow moving away from coal, or that allows for the use of coal in a sustainable way while we start renewables. There are multiple things that are possible.
Yeah.
But I think our current limitation is that we only see this as the thing that's possible, and that can't be true. I mean, this is it.
I agree. Probably as a parting shot, right? Rivonia Circle.
Yes.
You mentioned democracy builder.
Yes.
I would want to know what these other two are, because I think you said there's three main things that you do. You mentioned democracy builder. I would want to know how these other two, in the shortest time as possible, how are these other two impacting a change or some form of transformation in communities that will lead to probably and bettering people's lives?
Well, I mean, the other program I had mentioned was a political theatre. Political theatre allows artists to share with their communities, and so we usually, so if we're doing it here in Dobsonville, the artists are from Dobsonville. The people who then help us to do the logistics of the event are from the community. It's very rare that we outsource our logistics.
Yeah.
So it's so logistics from wherever in the north. It's very rare that we do that. And so there's a sharing of resources that happens in that way. But what political theatre allows the artists in that community to do is to share their skills, share their work, and share their understanding and their own expressions of democracy and politics. And again, that gets the conversation going.
Okay.
We've got a network of about 500 artists at this point. That network will continue to grow as we do political theatre. We've then managed to connect those artists with other people, whether those people are funders or whatever it is. And so those artists are able to say, okay, I've showcased my talents in this way, I've showcased my political expression in this way, and here's how I'm going to use that, whether it's for my community or for my own betterment, right?
Okay.
We've got, so I mean, on our research and policy side, we've got a lot going on, going on there. I mean,
that's research and policy.
Research and policy,
okay.
And really what we're trying to do, and I think we've been clear about this as the Rivonia Circle from our inception, is that we want to have an impact on the politics of this country, want to have an impact on the political culture of this country. Want to shift that. And I think we've done that, right? And I think that the way that people talk about politics and talk about democracy, part of that is our work, right? And there's a bunch of stuff that happens under research and policy that allows for that to happen. One of the, the more well-known things is the Constitutional Court, us being amicus curiae or the friends of the court rather, in the Constitutional Court, looking at the electoral amendment bill, right?
Okay.
And what we've managed to achieve there is to limit the signature requirement to 1,000 signatures for independent candidates who want to run.
Is it? Okay.
And that's incredibly important because it means that if when you are a community organizer or a community leader, you can, I mean, the bill made it possible for you to run, but
Yeah.
the barriers of entry were
Were
we
just
felt
too high.
a bit too high and effectively wouldn't be fair, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of our major wins, you know, is that we've been able to make that impact. And I think that it's incredibly important for individuals and groups and communities to have access to this election.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I think in closing,
Pleasure.
how did people find you? How did people find
You
Londiwe?
find Londiwe. You find us on social media, Rivonia Circle on all social media platforms. We're on X, Twitter, whatever it's called.
I believe you're on TikTok as well.
We're on Instagram, we are on TikTok as well, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
We're on Facebook as well, but we're also quite, we try to be quite responsive via email and on our phone.
Okay.
On email, I'm Londiwe at rivoniacircle.org.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, it was nice to have you here. Hopefully we'll have you some other time and still continue such conversations on what you guys are doing, and I'm sure you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I've attended more than one of your discussions, and I like how you guys do this stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, we
Thank you so
really
much.
appreciate you coming out here, and then we can have this conversation. Right, that is it. It's a series, remember, with other guests as well, and talking this issue, economics and community economics, unemployment, and what's the real solutions on these matters. And from me, Rasemi Simutala, and Londiwe today, I will go.